Good afternoon, and welcome to this EPC elections monitor about Romania. This is a peculiar elections monitor, as the election we did want to cover today did not take place yesterday. It was cancelled last Friday by the Romania's Constitutional Court on the ground of irregularities in the process. According to intelligence reports, the candidate who came first in the first round of the presidential election on November 24, Călin Georgescu, benefited from a foreign operation to increase his visibility on social media and by this to influence the result of the vote. The surge of Georgescu, so far a little-known former civil servant with no party behind him, had been completely unexpected. He campaigned with a nationalist message, very critical of the EU and NATO, and called for the end of support to Ukraine, all positions that make him close to Russia. Many questions remain over how many questions remain how his electoral campaign was organized. An inquiry has been opened and the police organized searches over the weekend. We will look at this situation with our speakers today and try to unpack what it means for the Romanian democracy. But despite the cancellation of this presidential election, we'll still discuss elections today, because last week, on 1st December, Romanians also went to polling stations to elect a new parliament. And then the Socialist Democratic Party of the outgoing prime minister finished first, ahead of the far-right alliances for the Union of Romanians, the National Liberal Party, and the centrist Save Romania Union. A new government will be formed, and one of its first tasks, indeed, will be to set new dates for the presidential election. So who will govern Romania in the coming months and years, and what will be the government's priorities? Are we heading towards a political or institutional instability in this country of 19 million inhabitants, the second biggest in Central and Eastern Europe after Poland? Romania is also a country of great strategic importance on the Black Sea and sharing borders with both Ukraine and Moldova. So what could be the consequences of the domestic developments for the EU and for NATO in the larger context of the war in Ukraine and geopolitical shifts in Europe and around? To answer this question, I am delighted to welcome our two speakers. First, my colleague Mihai Chihaia, policy analyst at the Europe in the World program. Welcome. And Veronica Anghel, your assistant professor at the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies, which is located in the European University Institute in Florence. Thank you very much. Welcome. Thank you both for being with us today. But before we start, let me add that people in the audience today will be able to ask questions. You can do so by using the chat, and I will share the questions with our speakers later in our discussion. So where shall we begin? Before looking at the reasons why the election was cancelled, namely a foreign interference in the democratic process of an EU member state, I think we need an update about the situation this Monday afternoon. The election did not take place yesterday, but Călin Georgescu went to a polling station and called on Romanians to defend democracy. So what have been the reactions of other political parties and indeed the reactions from the population in Romania? So I will ask first Veronica Anghel if you can give us an update on the situation and the atmosphere in Romania today.
Thank you, Eric. I'll just answer directly your question. Călin Georgescu did go to vote, and he says that the elections were illegally cancelled. He's making the statement that this is an anti-system movement, that the system is cancelled, and so he is very much in favor of creating and maintaining the disruption that he has been benefiting from. Other reason why he would go to the polls is that it's very unlikely that he will be able to stand for elections again. The Constitutional Court will either cancel his participation based on the fact that he will have been proven that he had foreign support, or, and it's more likely, there will be some kind of a cancellation of another candidature from Georgescu because of election fraud. He did not declare having spent anything for a very successful and sophisticated election. He declared that he the zero funds for his election. So it's in his interest to maintain the kind of disorder that he was a part of as well. The other candidates have been split. The runner-up, Elena Lasconi, who became the pro-European candidate supported by all others, decided to go against the kind of reactions that the other parties, not the far right, so let's call them mainstream parties or centrist parties, have had. And she has also claimed that the elections had been cancelled illegally or unlawfully. And so in a way, she's aligning with her counter candidate and also with the far right. And so she's distancing herself from the other parties, the Social Democrats and the National Liberal parties, as well as other, let's say, more progressive parties that would rather say that this was a good choice coming from the Constitutional Court, that the elections had to be cancelled. So I would say, as a first comment, that there is a lot of turmoil in the Romanian society. There's a lot of confusion. The decision from the Constitutional Court is being interpreted by people from all sides. It's a very complicated and sensitive period, and it's going to matter a lot how the decision of the court will be substantiated by harder evidence in the weeks to come and in preparation of new presidential elections. I'll leave it at that, and we'll probably return to this question about the legitimacy and the effects of the Constitutional Court decisions on Romanian democracy.
Thank you very much. And what do we know so far about the finding of the intelligence services or the police? What do we know about the campaign that is suspected to have taken place to the benefit of Călin Georgescu?
I think that the Romanian authorities have really laid bare the breadth and sophistication of Russia's influence operations, exposing how readily democratic institutions can be undermined by hostile foreign forces. This is what we have so far seen through the example of Georgescu's campaign. The intelligence report that substantiated the court's decision is this declassified Romanian intelligence report that anyone can read online if they read Romanian. It details how Georgescu's campaign was bolstered by these Russian forces bent on subverting Romania's national security interests. Russia is not directly named, but it is inferred that we are talking about Russia because the campaign's social media operations bore striking similarities to a known influence pattern that was called at the time the brother next to brother social media influencer-based phenomenon on TikTok that surged in Ukraine before Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. You could see that Georgescu's rise was really alarming. He rose from obscurity to worldwide trending status on TikTok just a few days before the election. So he was like from nothing to, I don't know, Taylor Swift levels. And this is without any declared campaign expenses, and this raised immediate red flags, but the evidence was not there until let's say that the security, the intelligence services looked at how these could be connected with Romanian security. And of course, what these reports also show is the intelligence services have really not done their job well, because they are doing this in hindsight rather than preventively. You have a lot of investigative journalists in Romania who alarmingly have done a far better job than Romania's intelligence services. And this is another major issue. So what we have in this report that comes from the National Defense Council, and it's sanctioned by the president and the people who are the members of this council, is in the end not as damning or even as interesting as the kind of results that we have from investigations coming from elsewhere, if I could be so blunt.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, I would ask Mihai about what leads to Russia in what we know about the campaign, and is it something that we have seen in other countries before? Is this a kind of pattern of Russian hybrid activities, or is there something specific in this case?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for the invitation, Eric. I think, yes, definitely this is part of a larger pattern. I think the election interference in Romania, I would put it in the larger context of Russian hybrid operations that we've seen pretty much all across Europe in the past, in the past years, but more intensely in the past months. I would include here different sabotage, cyber attacks, election interference. So I think this is just one piece of the bigger puzzle of Russian hybrid attacks on NATO allies and on EU member states. I think it's important also to point out that the Russian influence operations in Romania are not necessarily something new. Veronica was already pointing out to these investigative reports by different journalists. I think they also uncovered that over the years there have been several digital marketing companies, for instance, that were somehow attached to Kremlin or had links with Kremlin, that invested money in different disinformation operations in Romania that amplified far-right messages, for instance. So this is something that is not new. Maybe what's rather novel, I would say, is perhaps the how big this operation was. In this case, it was very sophisticated. We've seen. What we've seen on TikTok is a swarm of accounts. Some of them were dormant since 2016, I think, with very low activity, and then all of a sudden they were reactivated. These accounts were also coordinated outside TikTok, so they were coordinated on Telegram, for instance, which showed a high degree of sophistication and knowledge of TikTok algorithms, for instance, and how to avoid the safety nets of TikTok, which is not very well known as a platform with many important and good regulations. So yeah, I would say it's part of a bigger picture here. Just to add that what also particularly interesting was on TikTok, the use of fake accounts that apparently portray different Romanian institutions. Institutions such as security services, for instance, and these accounts were making it seem as if these institutions were supporting Călin Georgescu's candidacy, when in fact these accounts were fake, of course. And another point is, I think, different influencers who were paid to propagate the messages of Georgescu's campaign. Of course, Veronica pointed out that Georgescu declared €0 spent on his campaign. In fact, what the security services have uncovered, and also the independent journalists, is that quite a lot of money has been spent to pay these influencers, to pay different accounts on TikTok to propagate these messages. So altogether, it points out to a very sophisticated operation.
Thank you for all these elements, and we see that it was quite a big operations. But the question we could ask, starting from this, is why did it work? And I mean by that, why were Romanian voters sensitive to it? What are the deeper reasons for the fact that the message conveyed on TikTok with all this operation convinced people to vote for this unknown candidate? What does it mean about Romanian society, about the debates, the motivations of the voters? And also, what does it mean for the future, especially in the perspective of a new presidential election in a few weeks or months from now? Could we see the same thing happening, meaning that people would turn to another populist far-right politician? So I would ask you, Veronica, first.
That's an excellent question, because even if we do right to pay attention to the TikTok campaigns and the sophistication behind these sort of campaigns, this does not answer the question, why would such a message be so catchy for a Romanian audience? So just to make sure that we all know what we're talking about and what the candidate Călin Georgescu proposed as an offer, I want to say that he proposed the creation of this sort of an ethnocratic, nativist, religiously fundamentalist, protectionist state. He was really further to the right than any kind of candidate that we have previously measured as a representative of the far right in Romania. And he also promotes total neutrality in international relations, perceives Romania's NATO membership rather as a danger than as beneficial, has made statements regarding the fact that the European Union rather took away Romania's potential to evolve than gave up an opportunity for Romania to improve its standing. He sees no relevance in supporting Ukraine's war effort, and he has a history of very overt support of fascist, anti-Semitic interwar characters in Romania, for which he had been investigated by the state and also expelled from another far-right party. So he was further to the right, even for the far-right Alliance for the Union of Romanians, that has made significant gains in the parliament. So that said, there is exactly this question, like, why would this candidate get over 2 million votes? And first of all, we need to say that the far right in general has gathered about 35% of the seats in the Romanian parliament. So this is a greater movement that Georgescu supported, but he did not come up with it. I think that Romania's far-right tendencies have been flying below the radar because the mainstream parties, the Social Democrats and the National Liberals, have been catering to this part of the electorate while also maintaining the pro-European course. So they mixed a lot of these preferences. So we couldn't really see, or maybe the general audience who does not follow all these trends couldn't really see what was going on. However, there were these tendencies quite well captured by polls, and there are also other types of signals that we could have put together to say that this was an overdetermined outcome with or without Russian support. For example, we've conducted polls at the European University Institute together with YouGov, a UK-based pollster, that revealed that Romanians ranked among the Europeans most opposed to aiding Ukraine, alongside Bulgarians and Hungarians. So even if the Romanian government has been supporting Ukraine's war effort, albeit discreetly, the opposition in the society to supporting Ukraine pointed in a different direction. And what we've also uncovered is that this opposition is largely driven by the misinformation that the actions of the United States and NATO pose a greater threat to peace than Russia. This was a type of misinformation, the so-called blaming NATO misinformation that propagated in society without much opposition from the government. And so there wasn't really a conversation about the role of Russia and the importance of Ukraine for EU security. The other thing that it's important to notice is that Mr. Georgescu and the other far-right parties' beliefs also align with other widely held conspiracy theories regarding COVID-19. Yes, this still exists, right? He opposed vaccination, which is a stance that's resonating with a significant portion of the Romanian society, which according to the European Disease Prevention and Control Center, along with Bulgaria, recorded the lowest COVID-19 vaccination rates in the EU, right? So this really widespread skepticism. And another thing that really mattered in this perfect storm was that Georgescu's anti-establishment rhetoric also struck a chord with young people. So it was really those that are demographically disproportionately affected by poverty and inequality, and who didn't really benefit from the economic growth that the European Union provided that went in his direction. So among voters aged 18-24, 31% supported Georgescu, compared with just 8% of those over 65. So it's younger voters, particularly those under 44, that were more motivated to back Georgescu. And this, again, could have been seen. Romania has an alarming school dropout rate, the highest in the EU at 16%. Young people are mostly connected to social media. So in a way, you know, there isn't just one explanation, but there are many reasons why the far right garnered support. Anti-establishment protest vote being the most important, but also there are all these other issues in society that have not been dealt with, and now they're just cumulatively pointing in this direction.
And it seems also that Romanians living abroad voted in a large proportion for Georgescu, while traditionally, or at least in recent years, in Romania, but also in other countries like the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, these citizens living abroad would rather vote for the more progressive, more pro-EU politicians. So how do you explain also this evolution from the Romanians who are living in Western Europe, for instance? I don't know if you want to answer, or Mihai, maybe Veronica again. Yes.
I would be curious to know also Mihai's answer. But so here we really need to analyze what has been going on in the diaspora. Some hypotheses point into the direction of the fact that Romania has a very sizable diaspora. So it's very diverse. You would have the people that are, let's say, in more elite white-collar positions, whose votes have moved into towards the candidates that would be more progressive, and then you have communities of Romanians that are not particularly integrated in the larger society, that feel rather ignored or disrespected or discriminated by some of the things that they're seeing in society, and would rather support the kind of candidate that has promised to make Romania great again. That's part of the story. The other thing is that the diaspora that Romania has, it's mostly in Italy, where I also live, but also in Austria, has been noticing in the last year that you do have these sovereigntist voices in government, and that who have made significant advances, and who have in many ways normalized the far right, to show that, okay, it's not really a problem to express these sort of opinions. It's not really something that the foreigners, or let's say the Western Europeans, are doing it as well. So why do we have to toe the line in some other with some of these positions? So I think there's a mix of precarious. The precariat that tends to vote in a certain direction. It's connected to the diversity of the diaspora, and of course the diaspora gets its information much more from social media, and is thus more likely to be vulnerable to the kind of the effects that Mihai was also talking about.
Thank you. That's also a quite comprehensive answer. So I don't know if Mihai, you would like to add something to that, but I would also ask you about the Romanian support to NATO and EU, because Veronica said they were sensitive to disinformation or how these memberships were framed. Is it something that you have observed already, and is it consistent with the history of Romanian support to both organizations?
Well, thank you, Eric. Maybe I can add just maybe 1 or 2 points to the previous questions. I think also what I found particularly interesting when looking at Mr. Georgescu's campaign is how he sort of aligned himself to Trump's profile. So basically, he stated publicly that he's very much in favor of Trump. And then, of course, after the Constitutional Court canceled the elections, he sort of tried to make it look like it's in a similar situation as Trump. He's also persecuted by the justice. All the system is against him. And this and his argument was that this should grant him more public support. And he was, and I'm sure that among his supporters, maybe a lot of them became even more supportive of him because of this. Then I had 1 point on the current situation now, if I may, before I get into the EU-NATO. I think that right now it's good that the presidential elections will take place in a few months. It provides sort of a cooling off period. But at the same time, the society is very much divided. The society is very much looking for answers. And I think here the role of public institutions comes in. They should communicate more about, of course, the decision of the Constitutional Court, the reason behind it. They should communicate what is happening, why this is happening, and of course what's coming next. Because without a solid public campaign to explain the reasons, to explain what's happening, why it's happening, then this divide between society will only grow. And of course, at this point, we go with the assumption that Mr. Georgescu won't be able to run again, but his supporters might rally behind another ultranationalist candidate, be that, of course, the head of the Our Party or someone else. So we need to be very careful, because the next few months will be essential in this sense. Now on EU and NATO, I mean, of course, Romania is a very important ally for NATO, is an important member state for the EU. Romania has in NATO, Romania has become from a consumer of security to a provider of security since its accession to NATO in 2004. I think according to a latest Globsec poll, the support for NATO in Romania was high, was very high. I think it was over 80%, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember right now the numbers, but it was high. Then, of course, we can talk also about Romania's strategic importance for NATO, its strategic importance at the Black Sea. We have NATO troops in Romania. We have.
We'll come back to that in later in the discussion, Mihai.
All right. I don't know if I answered your question, but I'll stop now and I'll come back to that.
Thanks. Sorry, because I would like, before going into the geopolitical dimension of the developments, speaking a bit of the last week's elections, of the parliamentary elections. And what is surprising, or at least from a non-Romanian point of view, is that the results were quite different, with the PSD, the party of the Prime Minister, PNL, the center-right, and also USR, the centrists, did better than during the presidential election. So how can we explain the difference between the vote in the first round of the presidential election and the vote in the parliamentary elections? And what can we expect in terms of governments? Before the cancellation of the election last week, there was a kind of agreement between the three parties plus the Hungarian-speaking party. Are they going to govern together? Are they discussing together? What also is the situation there, Veronica?
I think that first of all, we need to notice that the far right tripled and tripled its presence in the parliament and outperformed. And so this is important. 35% of the parliament in combined seats in the Senate and in the Chamber of Deputies are now in the hands of the Alliance for the Union of Romanian, SOS, which is the party that supported a candidate that is a member of the European Parliament and whose candidature for the presidential elections was cancelled on similar grounds as what we see now in the case of Georgescu. So this goes back also to another question of yours about the precedent in these sort of things, because Șoșoacă, the person who was cancelled, was very prominent. They noticed that her campaign was Russian supported and she was very pro-Russian in her statements, but they didn't notice Georgescu. So you have then you have SOS, and then you also have this party that came out of nowhere that supports Georgescu, the party of young people, and together they have this really sizable presence in the parliament. On the other hand,
just to be clear, that means that voters go from one candidate to another depending on the elections, but the level of support is rather the same between the different votes. Is that correct?
So for the far right, it was a confirmation of the vote in the presidential elections in the first round. So the sequence was first round presidential elections, then another Sunday of parliamentary elections, then we would have had to vote yesterday for the second round of presidential elections. On the far right, it was confirmed. So the vote for Georgescu plus George Simion, who was the candidate for was confirmed by the outcome in the parliament. You asked rightfully, why did the Social Democrats and the Liberals performed better than their candidates? And I think that it's a very simple answer. The candidates that they put forward were truly uninspiring. The candidate for the Social Democrats was the Prime Minister of Romania. And of course, he had the party machine behind him, the famous Social Democrat party machine, but they couldn't mobilize people further from their loyal base. Many of those voters have shifted towards the Social Democrats have an ideology that is in fact much closer to the traditionalist values of the far right than with centrist values. However, in the aggregate, they are supposed to be more pro-European and pro-NATO. So that's the difference between the Social Democrats and the far right. And the candidate for the National Liberals was, again, I repeat myself, truly, truly uninspiring. He did not participate in any debate. He was only present in very friendly environment. He's the former head of the Romania's equivalent of the Joint Chief of Staff, so he's ex-military. He didn't have really a performative performance or a campaign, so it wasn't surprising that he was constantly polling below party scores. So you could still vote for the National Liberals, but it would have been very difficult to want to vote for their candidate, who is still the head of the Senate right now. So I think this is the simplest explanation that we can give. The fact that the far right candidates pulled some of the Social Democrat votes when it came to the presidential candidate, and also the candidates themselves repelled some of these votes, and that's what we saw in the numbers.
So Mihai, yes, if you want to follow up, and also, so who is going to form the government then?
All right, I can comment on that, but I'll let
you, if you want, yeah. Yep.
Shall I go ahead on this? Maybe just on a few thoughts on what's happening next. So at this point, we have a new parliament being formed. We're going to have a new government. I think the coalition of pro-European parties will stand. I don't know exactly in which configuration, because you asked about that, Eric. But I think we will have most likely a coalition of pro-European, Euro-Atlantic parties. Of course, a government that will be pro-European, pro-Euro-Atlantic, and after the government will take their seat, then they will decide on a new calendar for the elections. In the meantime, the president will stay in the office until a new president will be sworn in. Now, the whole electoral process for the first round of presidential elections will be restarted. What this means is that we'll have again candidates registering to run. We'll have again electoral campaign. And going back to what Veronica was saying about the leaders of the Social Democrat, the Liberal Party, and their score in elections, we'll most likely have a reconfiguration of candidates. I find it very hard to believe that the previous candidate for the Liberal Party will run again. This will not be the case. So we will see most likely new candidates being put forward. I wouldn't exclude parties creating coalition in supporting one candidate. So I think there's room for a lot of changes for the rerun of the first round of the presidential elections.
Thanks. Veronica, please.
I think it's very interesting, and I hope that we get to talk about coalition formation again, also because it will matter a lot who the next president will be. The president has within their jurisdiction, their purview to also nominate the prime minister. And when you have such a fragmented parliament, coalition bargaining will be very important. I wouldn't be so sure that this pro-European coalition will necessarily form in a wide spectrum. I think that the numbers in the parliament right now show that a standard coalition between the Social Democrats and the National Liberals, together with the UDMR, which is the Hungarian minority party, and with the minorities, which is a group of parliamentarians that vote coherently, but and who are always there in the Romanian party, in the Romanian parliament, according to the constitution, representing Romania's 18 minorities. So they have a special status, but in important times of coalition formation, they were able to give those extra votes to maintain a government. So the Social Democrats and the National Liberals and UDMR and the minorities will have enough votes to give the president, the cabinet. The USR, the Save Romania Union, which was the party supporting Elena Lasconi, the candidate who was the runner-up, has already said that they will not join this idea of having a unified coalition for the president. It's a bad idea, and I'm not an advisor for them, but I hope they reconsider. It sounds now like what Mihai was forecasting, that there would be this coalition forming, is not a sure thing. I think there's a lot of confusion right now in Romanian parties, and there's a lot of bargaining going on. I would be curious to see if indeed the Social Democrats, which remains the biggest party in Romania, would really give up on having their own candidate to go forward. It's the rational thing to do is exactly this, for all of them to unite with a candidate that is acceptable, maybe a technocrat of some sort, that is acceptable for a wider range of voters that are pro-EU and pro-NATO. But for the time being, I'm seeing more of a like petty politics, office bargaining and so on happening, rather than a truly ideological policy-based coalition formation.
Thank you. So if we look at the parties who could be in this coalition, we should not expect much change from, or at least in Romania's positions on EU issues, EU policies. There is one issue, however, which is important for Romania, which is the membership to the Schengen area. And this week, the Home Affairs ministers will discuss and should decide on whether to grant full-fledged membership to Romania as well as to Bulgaria, maybe starting from the 1st of January or at least earlier next year. So do you think that the recent developments, the potential instability because of the presidential elections could play against Romania and postpone this long-term objective of all the recent government, Romanian governments? Maybe Mihai, if you want to reply.
Well, in short, I hope not, and I don't think this will be the case because well, Romania is already part of Schengen by air and by sea, water, and Romania has been meeting the criteria for Schengen for quite a long time. So in the end, it's a matter of a political decision, which seems to be agreed that Romania will fully join Schengen. So I don't think this will be the case, and of course, I'm an optimist. I also hope that won't be the case, and the vote is in the decision is in 3 days, right? On the 12th of December, you said. So yeah.
Well, I also think that when it comes to the Schengen area, this is a very technical portfolio. Romania's borders are very secured. They've been for a long time, and if I'm allowed to joke, I don't think that even if the far right comes into power, strengthening the borders will be a problem. They will definitely strengthen those borders. So if anyone has to make the case for Romania in Schengen, we can definitely assure them that even if the worst guys come to power, they will invest more in maintaining Romania's external borders and not less.
Thank you. I see we had around 15 minutes left, and I know, Veronica, that maybe you will need to leave earlier. So if you have to
I've made other arrangements, so I can stay until the end.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask and come back to you, Mihai, about the geopolitical importance of Romania. So you started to explain that earlier on. So could you develop that, and so we can understand exactly why what happens in Romania matters for the rest of the EU and for NATO and even for Ukraine?
Well, to pick it up where I left it, Romania is an important ally on the eastern flank for NATO. It matters, I would say, even more now with the Russian threat at its borders. We've seen in the past couple of months many signals from political and military leaders in EU and NATO member states announcing that there can be a potential Russian attack in the next 3, 4, 5 years. So this makes, of course, Romanian position is even more important. And this is sustained also by Romania's position in NATO's defense plans, which are recently agreed, and are basically the plans that designate what happens in case there is a Russian attack. So Romania essential role there. Besides that, there are many very important installations in Romania. We have the missile defense shield, the Aegis Ashore in Deveselu. We have the Mihai Călin Air Base, which will be upgraded in the next years, and it will become, I think, it's scheduled to become the biggest NATO's air base in Europe, if I'm not if I'm not wrong. There's of course U.S. troops in Romania. There's also a multinational battle group agreed by NATO in 2000 and 2022, where France is the lead nation. This battle group is scheduled to be upgraded to a brigade by next year. So we'll expect more French troops in Romania. So all in all, Romania's role is essential. Of course, on the defense spending, Romania is also set to meet this year 2.25% of defense budget. So it's also a net contributor to defense. And as I was saying, since Romania joined NATO in 2004, Romania has become from a consumer security a provider of security. But then going back maybe to your question, which hinted whether this Romania's role will be threatened. I think all these disinformation and hybrid attacks definitely threaten Romania, and we see how important is democratic resilience, how important resilience against these hybrid threats. How important this is as well. And overall, I think it also points to the need of the NATO allies to develop more tools to tackle these hybrid threats. I know there have been quite a few responses from NATO, but I don't think enough has been done. Of course, one solution is calling out the perpetrator, which is Russia in this case, but there is much more that can be done at NATO level to enhance our resilience.
Can I just add something?
Yes,
One
yes,
second.
Veronica, and then I will follow up. Yeah.
I'm just I think I want to be a little bit more critical about Romania's capacity to be a security provider. I think that the fact that Romania is even here, having to cancel its elections as a sort of a last resort through the Constitutional Court is still a subtle triumph for the Kremlin. So in a way, this is still a situation that's a kind of a win-win for the Kremlin, because they've managed to, I'm sure, through their hybrid action to meet other goals, such as lower trust in institutions, so more division in the society, bring to the fore issues of national security that are now being debated and that we thought that would have been agreed on for a long period of time, such as Romania's role in NATO. And I also think that it's very clear that Romania's intelligence services, as well as the wider establishment, have shown significant weakness in not being able to see something that was just growing in their backyard. We've covered this already at the beginning of our conversation. No matter how much Russia wanted a pro-Russian in the highest office in the land, this does not mean that these were not homegrown problems that everybody ignored, and that's also very important as a NATO ally to stress that without American support right now, we wouldn't have, the Romanians could not have been in the position to even have enough evidence to decide a rerun of the elections as well. We've seen this support come out from our NATO partners immediately in the days before the cancellations of elections, from Emmanuel Macron, from Lamy in UK, from Antony Blinken most directly, from the US Embassy in Bucharest, really stressing the need to invest more in Romania's pro-EU and pro-NATO direction. So I think that their participation was very important in showing solidarity and support with Romania's weak institutions.
Yes, Mihai, please.
Can I just quickly add something to this? I think this also stands as a lesson learned for us. All these weaknesses that, of course, Veronica rightly pointed out to them. There is a lesson to be learned here, and I think what we need to do is actually to learn from this and see how we can avoid this scenario happening again. Of course, in Romania, but also more generally in NATO. So not only a lesson learned for us, but also a lesson learned for NATO. And if we don't learn from these mistakes, it will be very difficult to counter these hybrid threats in the future.
Yes, you alluded to measures that could be taken to support Romania, and it's actually one of the questions we have in the chat. So what could NATO do to support, help, or protect Romania against hybrid threats, against cyber attacks, and to support the democratic process?
Well,
yeah.
Well, firstly, I think it's about sharing information. But to share information, of course, first you need to find out exactly what has happened. Where were the vulnerabilities, what didn't go well, and then the second step is actually to share these lessons with our partners, with NATO at the EU level as well, because there are many similarities in the hybrid threats that other member states are facing. So first step would be to share the information. And then I would say also to better understand how other allies have tackled these issues. I think just one example that comes to mind is of course Lithuania is a very specific example, but there has been quite a major disinformation campaign regarding the NATO brigade that is supposed to take full effect, I think, in 2027, and other member states and allies have faced similar issues. So it's more about taking the lessons learned and then see what could work in the case of Romania.
I would only add that I think this is a moment of reckoning. Romania was supposed to be very knowledgeable, particularly in terms of hybrid threats. Romanian representatives would teach the Moldovans or governments in the Balkans or even in Georgia how to create more resilient systems when it comes to these kind of information warfare and threats. I think it's very clear now that the kind of abilities that particularly the secret services were presenting themselves to have are not there. So probably these kind of projects of collaboration should also be questioned right now and see what kind of knowledge is Romania really exporting, and then perhaps try to train train differently, invest differently in the ability of this particular state to safeguard its information environment.
Thank you. For the last minutes, I will try to mix the different questions we have. One is about should what happened in Romania, meaning the cancellation of the election, be a model for other countries when they have to face this kind of situation? And there is also a bit of a provocative question about why the parliamentary elections were not cancelled, and was it because the result was more acceptable to the political system? So how, and the last question is there a risk of having another, but we touched upon that before, but a risk of having another far-right candidate winning the presidential election when it takes place? So 3 complementary questions. Maybe you want to start, Mihai, and then I'll give the closing floor to Veronica.
Sure, happy to go first. Maybe just to pick on some of the things. One question was on right if this disinformation campaign will continue or something on these lines. I think it's already continuing. We've seen in the past days since the elections were cancelled, quite a lot of disinformation involving the armed forces in Romania, especially on TikTok, different videos with military equipment I'm sorry, military equipment being moved. These were videos from the preparations for the Romanian National Day parade, and they were taken out of context and presented as if Romania is preparing for war, for instance. That was one disinformation. Then another was that the military service in Romania will be reintroduced. These, I think, will continue to happen. And now, as the electoral process will be restarted, more disinformation will continue. What I meant to say earlier is that now we have a bit of time to regroup. Now we know what we're facing. We know sort of the full extent. So we have a bit of time to regroup and then tackle the issue. So there is this cooling period, which will give us exactly this opportunity. Then there was another question regarding whether what happened in Romania could happen in other places, right, Eric? I think. Sure. I mean, there are many similarities of what's happening in other EU member states already. So I think this pattern will continue. I think the trend of these hybrid attacks will only grow, be it, of course, election interference, be it sabotage, being attacks against critical infrastructure. We've seen what has happened in the past months on underwater sea cables, for instance. So I think this trend of combining different hybrid tactics will only continue. I'll stop here just to give Veronica the opportunity to also comment on some of the questions.
The question on why were the parliamentary elections not cancelled is a very good question. If we follow the logic of the Constitutional Court's decision, which was a self-referral, and so they could have referred this also in the case of the parliamentary elections, based on the fact that this intelligence report that was the basis of this decision also mentioned that similar activities of support from a state-like actor were also noticed in the case of this Young People's Party that made the threshold and that was so supportive of Georgescu. So if the same logic were to be followed according to the letter of the law or the procedural decision making, the same should have happened for the parliament. However, the political part of decision making shows that stability and the idea of stability trumped these kind of procedural workarounds, because also the court could have waited for the elections to go on and to have a winner and then invalidate the win of Georgescu if that were to have been the case. But they decided to do this very quickly before the last round of elections. So I think that the idea of stability, of writing other agencies' messes somehow, that they did not catch this kind of interference early on, trumped other types of considerations. And it's also important to note that these elections were cancelled based on the idea of interference, not so really national security stuff, not on the fact that Georgescu didn't declare funds for his campaign or other things which are criminal but are not of that ranking. Should the cancellation be a model for other countries? I think it depends on the legal system of other countries as well. And if national security is part of the constitutional order in other countries, this should be considered. However, it would be much better for these kind of situations not to happen, because in the end this is a win-win for the Kremlin. If you lower the trust in the institutions, it's only going to come and have a greater effect in the long run. So preferably this is not a model that other countries would follow, even if it's a legal path.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Thank you, Mihai. And thanks also to the audience and the people who asked questions. So there will be a lot to follow in Romania in 2025, and we'll sure discuss about it. I wish you all a good afternoon, and see you for another elections monitor on the EPC. Goodbye. Thank you.